Hello and welcome to Conversations in Close Protection with your hosts Chuck Randall and Chris Story. Our goal is to engage the greater protection community, inspire innovative thought, and as always, continue the conversation around all things close protection.
This is Conversations Close Protection. I am the caffeinated Chuck Randolph across the digital divide, the epistemological Mr. Chris Story. Good morning.
Nice, dude. I didn't think you were going to get that one.
I did it. Oh, 311. You did
Oh,
it.
311, you made it.
How are you doing, man? Where are you?
Exactly.
Where are you with your
Dude,
blurred background? The Bat Cave?
I'm at home, which is very exciting.
Yeah, that's like
Nice. I
two
see
weekends
you
in a
with
row, I
your,
think.
oh, yeah, it is. It's freaking, I don't use amazing very often, but being being at home is amazing.
So let me ask you a question. As we record this, and I know we're supposed to be evergreen, so I'm breaking all podcast rules right now, but it is daylight savings time, spring forward. How does
Yeah.
that affect you?
Uh,
Or doesn't it?
I think it does. I think I was literally thinking about this last night, how we're solar powered, right? Or at least I am. Like I get so much more done in the with
Yep.
when the sun's up longer. And then I think it's just that in the winter you just take time to recharge. It doesn't feel like that. But I have a harder time in the fall when it's just darkness to darkness, right? I have that harder time, but I'm like the freaking Energizer bunny when it goes when we have extra hours of daylight.
Well,
I enjoy it.
there's something about getting up in this, getting up when the sun is coming up, or I get up usually every day around like 5:15, 5:30, and then I try to be at the gym at 6:15. But there's something about getting up and the sun is kind of up and you just kind of have your cup of coffee or whatever, a couple minutes of quiet. I'm with you, and then you feel good. Um,
Yeah.
I went
Well,
today. I did about 3.7 miles today on the treadmill just because I knew like you lose that hour of sleep. I woke up, was super groggy.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited for time change.
It's interesting. Uh, the whole like I've been trying to get a workout in where I can as of late. But damn, if when you get up at 5 and you're in the gym and you're back by 7:30, like how much more productive your day is just by
Yeah.
like rearranging it for that extra
I don't know if it
hour and 15.
well, I don't know if it comes from the military or something, but there is something like just I honestly I prefer to work out in the afternoon if I could. I sleep better that way. But there is something about that morning workout, and I think it's just been beaten into us from the military where you get up, you do your workout, do what you got to do, and then there's something like I don't know about you, Chris, but I get a strange satisfaction when I'm leaving Golds and I see people coming in because I'm thinking like I'm finished and you're just
Mhm.
starting.
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting. It, it's interesting when you just transition from like what you want for a routine to what you need, right?
Mhm.
You want to do those things. I prefer to get up and get it done. And you think about like, hey, you can't create more time. Well, yeah, you can. Get your happy ass out of bed at 5 instead of 7, and you give yourself, 10 to 14 more hours a week. Uh, you reach it. You have to manage whatever that sleep cycle is, but I think from a productivity standpoint, you're like, where do I find 10 to 14 hours in a week? And you're like, well, it's probably not sleeping for 10 hours a day.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's little things too, like, you don't need to doom scroll or read 25, you can pretty much get a handle on what's going on every day within probably 15 minutes. And I'm one that will like, oh, I've looked at like 15 different papers, only realize here's kind of the main things happening in the world. And you can cut back on time like that. And I think also you're right in the morning, which means going to bed at a consistent time every night to kind of get that, that regular sleep cycle. So then your body isn't always in that constant state of like, what the hell is happening today? Where are we? Uh,
Mhm.
And I think a lot of people like in the industry, especially, are used to weird hours and all that. So I think when you're home, if you can just stick to a schedule, it's probably far more better for you both mentally and physically.
Mo better, indeed.
Um, I was at the Texas EP event last night that Mikey G put on. It was another well done event over in San Antonio.
Nice.
Nice to see that growing community. And I think that I did not make the skeet shoot and I did not make the dinner the night before, just because we had a long week at work with the Ontic Summit.
Well, that
But
sounds very Texas.
it was very Texas. I wore my cowboy hat. And Mike does a good job. I'm sure there'll be videos and pictures coming up, but he always puts on a very, like, I would just say professional, and the atmosphere is always just strong Texas vibe.
Nice.
Where
Franchise,
were
Mike.
you?
Franchise.
Where were you?
Not in Texas.
You should have come and you know what? We need CICP cowboy hats
Oh my God. That'd be awesome.
or
I have
fezzes. I'm not sure.
a fez. No, no, no. Maybe pork pie hats. That'll
Oh,
work.
awesome.
That'd be awesome.
That would be cool.
Yeah, yeah.
That would be cool. So how have you been? How have you been? Have you been on the road a lot? We haven't recorded in a couple weeks just because of travel and busy schedules. So
Yeah, it's been a while. It's funny when you're like, we're gonna commit to record more, and then freaking
life.
that life and work, right? I think so yeah, I've been on the road for quite some time. Um, Mr. Playing a little bit of Mr. Fix It,
Yep.
but that's changing and I'm excited about that. So it's gonna be good.
Awesome. And more to come on that. So I think we
Yes.
probably need to do we probably need to do an updated podcast, like where are we, what's going on in our lives, what are some things coming up, because there's some cool things. I actually was just on Ryan Long's Business of Intelligence podcast a couple of weeks ago,
I
something we
heard.
recorded a while ago, but uh, it was fun. It was talking about like servant leadership, imposter syndrome, not the normal Chuck Randolph. And of course, it was a little interesting because I'm not used to being on the other side of the mic.
Yeah.
So it was fun. I enjoyed it. Ryan did a great job. I should see if he'd let us repost that here, but it was good. And I enjoyed it. What are you
Nice.
listening to lately?
Um, Books. I've been doing audiobooks. I haven't been doing a whole lot of podcasts. I mean, I just my podcast uh deck is freaking just stacks up. A lot of Sean Ryan as of late, just
Yep.
and a lot of combat story. But mostly
Like,
it's just been books.
do you ever listen to the Team House?
No, that for whatever reason that one hasn't really
I,
that hasn't glommed on, or I haven't
I
glommed onto that as much.
I don't listen to every one the guys do there. Every once in a while, they had somebody from the South African military who was like Cella Scout, and did some work in Zimbabwe, and I thought that was fascinating just to hear that man's story. Obviously an older fellow, but he had just such an interesting story. And I did pick up something they did. I listened to yesterday when I was at the gym. I'd love to get this guy on the podcast and talk to him. I think his name is John Lechner, and he wrote a book called Death is Our Business, and it's basically inside the Wagner Group.
Mm,
And it was, I think the pod itself was like an hour or so. The only wonky thing about the Team House pod, if I'm being honest, is the randomization of ads. And I understand, like, that's how you pay for some pods. We haven't done that here yet, but like there's no like, hey, we'll be back in again in a minute. So they're just talking, all of a sudden it's a break and then some random ad, and then it goes right back in, and then it could be half a minute later, and then there's another one. Kind of makes it wonky sometimes when you're listening because it takes you out. There's no like, there's no clear like, hey, we're going to go into a commercial break now and then come back. So I
right.
guess that'd be
Just
my only
cuts over.
criticism. But
Yeah. Well, I mean,
But
but one of the things is those guys, I think that they've done really well
oh
with
yeah,
multiple businesses supporting that, you know,
yeah.
um, pretty good. But I mean, or not, but just for real, you know, I think they've done a great job. So that's pretty
No,
cool.
yeah, yeah, and they ask some great questions. I mean, I do. I'll normally when I'm scrolling through when something hits, usually if something hits me that they do, and I listen, I'm always impressed by the level of depth. You know, clearly they read and they do and they study, and you know, I appreciate that. I just
Yeah.
wish they could get that ad thing sorted out because you all of a sudden you're like, wait, what? Now we're listening to HEB?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I find interesting about some of the like military and special operations, but mostly military base podcast is excuse me is a lot of times there's a lot of frustration around what you found out you were doing or whatever, right? Like for example, you know, here's what I had to do as a you know special forces guy, blah blah blah, and yet that's what why people listen to whatever you're.
Yeah,
That's why you have an audience because you're a special forces guy. So it's kind of challenging for me to listen to the, you know, they don't care and they this and they that. And then, and yeah, I get it on some level, but this is also something that you volunteered for. And oh, by the way, if you didn't go do those things, you wouldn't be doing what you're doing now. So
yeah.
it's a little bit of chicken before the egg for me, but I get it, right? That moral injury that you face. I mean, I think the best thing that you could really say about the military is that, hey, they do a really good job at teaching you how to be all the things that you need to be, and they don't do a very good job at teaching you how to not do that or how to forget about it or, you know,
Yeah, or
that
to
mental health
transition. I
aspects.
mean,
Yeah,
look,
yeah,
and there's been an entire cottage industry around helping people transition from
yeah,
military to
yeah, yeah.
business. And I agree with you. I mean, you know, but that's the military. They're paying and bringing you into a business to do, you know, to do a job.
Yeah.
But then when they're done, they're like, all right, thank you. And then we run into a lot of things, you know, everything from, hey, what's the mission now in the business side? I can't figure that out to how do I transition and understand my skills where I was a sniper here and how do I translate that into business? Or maybe I was a targeteer. Now, what does that
Hmm.
mean for business? And I think there's tons of skills and there's tons of places that will help people figure that out. It's just a matter of figuring out, like digging into those skill sets and saying, this is, you know, this is the business version of what you're doing. I'm a sniper,
Hmm.
great. Aside from pulling a trigger, there's a lot of planning, logistics, course of action development, options analysis, resource management, all that can be translated. And a
Hmm.
targeteer, man, don't get me started. I think that's gold for the private intel sector.
Is there a second E in that? It's like a
I know
mouseketeer,
targeters or targeteers. I think it depends on who you talk to.
tomato, tomato,
Probably
you know?
targeters is the more recognized, but I've also heard folks refer to them as targeteers, but
Have you
which
heard
I
of
think
anybody
is
call it a target? Like they try to bougie it
uh,
up a little bit?
I think the targeteers. But if you think about it from like our point of view, you know, we have executives protect. We have all source analysts that get that. We have, you know, all different ints that maybe walk up and represent, but like a targeter or a targeteer, as you called it. Hey, tell me how you're gonna get my CEO.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah.
Let's go through the process and I'll tell you where the gaps are.
Hmm.
So, but then you know, and all of that also, I think, which kind of maybe goes along to today's guest and all that, is this idea of like, you know, your military, or let's just group it all, your security people first and business people by necessity. And
Hmm.
now at some point you get thrown out of like the military security pool, and now you're in this business pool and you're swimming with different sharks and you're swimming with different dolphins, and what you don't realize is like, yeah, you can swim in here, but all the vernacular and everything's different. So it makes it almost feel impossible to get done.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think know we can get into it here in a little bit, but I think that's really what it's all about. Is that like figuring it out and trying to figure it out quickly, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's really the deal. So let's jump into it.
Well, I know that our guest today, we've both known him for a while, but you and I spoke about it, especially after the Close Protection Conference this year, and you were like, man, we got to get this guy on. And, trying to figure that out and get through the logistics is always interesting. And then when you throw an international flavor into there, it even makes it even a little bit more hard. But you want to give a little background or a little tidbit before we go? Who do we have on today?
Yeah, so today we have Kevin Palacios. I didn't really know it because he had spoken on something different when I'd gone down to the Mexico City Protectors Conference, which is interesting, right? Because when somebody comes up and they're like, "Hey, talking about this, that, and the other thing," you're like, "Okay, that's a thing," but some things resonate and others don't, right? And so when I heard him at the Protection Conference, when he's like, talking about essentially EP as it applies to business, right? And being able to really focus on ROI, or EPROI as it is. I was like, oh, everybody needs to hear this,
Yep.
because, and quite frankly, because a lot of folks in the industry are new, and we've lost a lot of um, what would you call it? I guess industry knowledge with
Yep.
essentially the regreening of the industry. And I was just like, holy smokes, like everybody needs to hear this. And so um, I was actually looking for Tom Ryan's uh, uh, discussion, and I'm like, oh, he's next. And I'm like, who's this guy? I'm like, all right, well, I guess I'll listen to what he has to say, because suddenly he's like, I'm like, everybody's here what this guy's saying. So, anyways, it was very, very interesting, and it was a great discussion. And I stood in line behind a couple folks waiting to talk to him, because what he had to say I thought was very, very important, and I think everybody could learn from it, especially if you're in the corporate space looking for, how do I quote unquote prove that negative that everybody says that we have to prove, with quote unquote nothing happening, right?
Yep.
And I think it's good. And the other thing is as we've discussed before, is that I think a lot of and you'll hear it in the podcast, is that a lot of the industry categorizes ROI from a business perspective uh, incorrectly. Um, we're using fruit, but we're not using the same fruit
Right.
in the bowl, if you will. So I think it's a very, very valuable lesson for everybody. And the guy's an expert. I mean, he's done his 10 years, 10,000 hours, whatever, how many hours it is. Like, he is literally the guy. I'm like, hey, how are you going to monetize this? Right? Business to business. He's like, I'm not. I just want it to get out there. And I'm like, okay.
Let's talk.
So,
Well, I mean,
yeah.
he's the chair of the global EP community, isn't he, for ASI, or as is
He,
international?
yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. So I
Which
mean,
is exciting, right? We got an 800-pound brain behind the freaking, not the steering wheel, but he's the guy that's freaking telling the steering wheel where to go. So that part's important.
well, I would think as people go in to listen to this one, also consider, like, given the backdrop of where we are now, we've had the Brian Thompson murder in December. We still don't know what's going on with that state insurance executive in I think it was Oregon, whose house got shot up. We see this growing, like, kill your boss, eat the rich. So, which means that and I hate to use those words, seat at the table, so overused, but I like the idea of, like, just getting in the room. And I think there's many of those doors are open for EP practitioners and security leaders to have that discussion about the protective effort for the C-suite of whatever organization you're in. But now you're going to get in the room, and I think this is what even makes these conversations more important, in order to stay in the room in the extended period and not get your budget reduced 6 months after it's over, air quotes, because everybody thinks it's safer.
Correct.
Understanding things like ROI, understanding that business value, understanding the empirical side of EP, if you will keep you in the room and keep your program relevant. and help you, be there to help enable and make decisions, and not just be told, next time there's a crisis. So
Yeah, and I think the next thing that's important to listen to when folks are listening with this is that, in terms of actual time, the Thompson murder was only 4 months ago,
yeah,
barely, right? And so it seems like forever ago from a news cycle perspective, but people, business, corporate doesn't move that fast, and it's still top of mind for many, many organizations. So I think it's important to understand that, and important to understand that yes, you can and should go back to your organization to go, hey, here's what we have to here's what we have to be concerned about, with this. It wasn't just, yes, it was 2024, but also it was only 4 months ago.
Yep. Awesome. Well, let's do this, Chris. Let's get to your interview with Kevin.
Let's do it.
All right, so today we are joined by the new 800-pound brain in executive protection, Kevin Palacios. Kevin, welcome to Conversations in Close Protection.
Thank you, Chris, for having me here, and well, I'm flattered with your comments. Yeah, by all means, thanks.
No, thank you. So, executive protection is often what is it, brawn over brain, right? And so there's not a whole lot of folks that come into this with into our industry with well, a doctorate level thought process like you do, right? So we were talking before the show that, I'm fortunate that I was in the wrong place at the right time at the IPSB conference, because I was looking for the room to listen to a friend, Tom Ryan, speak, and this guy up there that I'd only seen, I didn't really know who he was, but he was dropping all of these just excellent discussion points about risk management and ROI in the EP space, and talking through your mastery of this, your 10,000 hours of walking through this, right? So Green's mastery. So congratulations on that. But it really, I think I stood in line for 10 minutes waiting to talk to you, because there's other people that are, like trying to bend your ear. And I'm like, look, dude, I want to talk about this more. And I want you to be on our podcast. And, you turned me into a fan. So I'm excited to have the conversation about, how you got your start, what really drove you into focusing on risk management, and then what drove you to focus on the or develop the EP ROI over time. So welcome to the show. And why don't you give us a little background how you got your start in executive protection or security overall?
Sure. Well, again, thanks for having me here. My story will be somewhat similar, maybe, than many people. In my case, well, I got into EP by chances mostly. My background is more of a administrative background, really. And at some point, was of course very early in my career, I was sort of invited to get involved into EP because of some personal skills, proficiency in languages, and I was very proficient in martial arts, and I was also a practical shooter. And yeah, I did have some experience, mostly on managing travel for executives that were basically traveling throughout my part of the world. My previous job was more on tourism, tourism and travel. And I had to get, of course, all of my training. Being a full civilian, I started training and learning. My original EP training was actually done in Canada, by
Really?
a company, that actually flew me there to do a month-long EP training. Because
Oh,
again, I was
okay.
starting from scratch.
Yeah.
And I sort of course, like most people, got really or fell in love with the industry, with what we do here. Um, Somehow, I didn't stop learning because I felt as a handicap to not have a police, a military background.
Mm.
So I kept on studying. I went on to do all my IFPO certifications originally. Then I went on to ASAS for all of their certifications.
Mhm.
So I have them all. Yeah, you name them. When I have to detail all my acronyms after the
Yeah.
name, yeah, I have
Yeah.
lots of them.
You have like 13 of them or so, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So so I went on again through project management. Also, I'm a certified coach, by the way, and I went on to again learning about Six Sigma quality. I'm a certified auditor for several ISO standards, and yeah, I sort of also kept a part of my side gig being a university professor. Yeah. So anyway, that was the beginning of my career. I went through all the ranks in EP, going from again a support, EP agent, the driver, lead agent, and then, well, of course, in the past few years, I've been more involved in the management side of it.
Okay. Right. So what was your favorite part about it as you got into it as a quote unquote person without a background? And what was the most challenging part as you got into the industry that you felt as a person without a quote unquote background?
Yeah, I was, of course, very familiar on dealing with principles, as I told you, because I was, of course, in the tour and travel business, and we were sort of aiming to high-end individuals. That was again more on a leisure sort of activities. You know, I used to be also a tour guide as well, so it was
Okay.
something that I did enjoy again, and I'm very familiar on dealing with executives and so. So for me, it was sort of an easy transition, and it was pretty simple for me because especially the logistics part of it, I managed it very well. Um, the cool part, of course, was starting traveling and being able to, again, doing a lot of, more getting into the actual livelihood of these individuals that I knew before just on brief periods of time,
Mm.
which was, again, only when they were like touring or traveling, whatever.
Hmm.
Um, the challenging part, and that's also part of what we may get to talk about now, is that at first I thought that there was something that I didn't find on EP. Um, I didn't find the structure of it. I needed basically a framework, and the more I kept on digging into, all sorts of books and training, and I did a few courses, I saw that most EP related material is basically full of, I'll say, entertaining war stories. Yeah,
Hmm.
about how, people served on the Secret Service or in dignitary details. So lots of stories, lots of interesting, colorful stories, but very little on the actual, I'll say hard skills, and mostly very little on again structured for executive protection as a business process. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. No, that
Yeah.
makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And and so it sounds like the security portion of what you were doing was kind of like the natural progression. You had the language, you had the dealing, you had the travel piece down, you had the engaging with the principals, and so for whatever reason that you just ended up into the security role as well, right? As a expansion of what you were already doing, and that's the point that you anchored to. What
Yep.
was it
Yep.
that caused you to anchor to it?
Um, I would say that this gave me a better, I'll say, career opportunities. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
was better pay. Yeah. Plus, as I managed to sort of climb very rapidly through different ranks, at some point, not it didn't took me more than perhaps some 3 years or so to go up to a management level. And then, of course, also I ended up creating my own company. So yeah, basically, it was a much better livelihood, I would say.
Okay. Okay. So because you're business minded and you're doing this research and most of it is operational, none of it is really from a business perspective. You decided to create your own.
I ended up doing that. Yep. The my conclusion was that somehow most of the EP industry had been sort of hovering, lingering about operational level, tactical level discussions, a lot of discussions about formations and whether you have to carry your gun in this place or that place or stuff like that and very little or no discussions at the strategic level. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And so you decided to fill that void. How and you I think you mentioned in the on when you're on stage that it's taken you what
10 years. Yeah.
10
Yeah.
years and
It's
going.
been a thing of the past 10 years. Again, developing lots of information and lots of, I'll say, bits and pieces that I ended up, of course, putting together, yeah, in
Mhm.
a framework. Um, so, just as more background, well, I am a CPP and a PSP by ASAS and also a CSSM by IFPO. And in all of those materials, it's very interesting because they do tell you pretty much just the basics on EP, um, and it's always sort of separated from the business side of it. Yeah,
Mhm.
like EP, of course, has its beauty and is a specific portion of the industry and sort of no one matter on the uh, on developing it more as a business process. Yeah, um, it's interesting anyway. Yeah.
Well, so you're again your quest essentially was to mature EP into the business process side of where the rest of the security industry is, essentially.
Yeah. I guess the will be taking EP out of just being an operational activity
Hmm.
and becoming a business enabler process. Yeah.
Okay.
And in doing so, yeah, the fact is that indeed there is a need for standards. There is a need for proper guidelines at all different levels.
Mhm.
Um, the what I found anyway, well, it was again part of my research is that when we talk about EP, just as it would be in some other areas of security, we would need to address four different tiers, four different levels. So then, of course, there is this the highest tier will be like strategic, management, corporate security managers, directors, what they
Mhm.
need to know about EP and how they should, of course, see the benefits of it and understand it. Then there is a second level that will be more like a team leader type of activities that, of course, have to a lot to do with the actual management of EP operations,
Mhm.
and then the EP agent, and also another interesting part is that we do need to work a lot on the fourth tier, which is the actual client, the protectee
Okay.
and they all should have well, several parts that will be in common, like a common language and a common way of addressing, EP as a um, constant improvement activity. Yeah, because then that was also a subproduct of a lot of my research that I found really no or almost no um, um, content about how to do data-driven decision making in EP. It was
Okay.
more like okay, if you it was a lot about gut feelings and subjective decision regarding threats and regarding risks and no really I couldn't really find like hard uh, content on using actionable data in order to make decisions on EP. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
So I think it's interesting. I think we talked briefly about it. Like, I think Filippo Marino had done a study recently, past couple of years, that talked about this, essentially talked about risk decision-making ability, what was expected of a security professional and what the security professional delivered versus that of someone who wasn't in the security industry, and it was only marginally better. Um, Based on mostly, like you said, gut feel, anecdotal evidence, but nothing that was actually factually proven. It's just very, very subjective, right? So now you're into this essentially evidence-based, data-driven approach to decision making.
yeah. I strongly believe that the past few events, both at the corporate level as well as with government figures, show us that we now more than ever need a zero error approach to EP. Yeah, and basically the old ways of doing it, or the current ways of running EP, which again are based on gut feelings and again subjective approach and mostly I'll say even focusing only on threat, yeah, assessment instead of doing a full risk management process, which are totally different things,
Mhm.
would be the reasons why we have had these incidents in the past year.
Right. So I agree with you on everything you said this far. And one of the things that Chuck says, and I agree with also, is that, um, protectors are really good at managing risk or threats in the moment, but
Mhm.
not necessarily good at projecting what those might be 30, 60, 90 days essentially as a formal risk management program as you're discussing. So we're aligned. I think that the difference is that you've come up with a process, like a formal risk management process that is based, I would imagine, in other areas, but really developed for executive protection, right? So
Yeah,
I'm excited to
yeah.
hear about that.
No, I'm pretty excited really about again finding an area where I was able to, I guess, apply a lot of my, I'll say, years and years of studying and so because again EP is dear to my heart. This is what I do. This is what I've been doing for the past 25 years. And I do believe that this will, um, I guess, support, help advance the EP industry altogether. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I saw. So really, there's two. Well, as I understand it, there's two major areas of study and major areas that you bring to the table, which is this overall risk management program or risk management thought process for executive protection, which gives us, hopefully gets us out of that, it doesn't take it away from us that, you're a good risk manager in the moment, right? But that means you have to be reactive, right? Or you're kind of waiting for the risk to happen, right? So
Yeah.
so the idea is that we're able to either both project it further and use data-driven decision making in executive protection, and then the the result becomes the EPROI or the ROEPI, sorry, right? Return on executive protection investment. Is that
Yes.
fundamentally how it's supposed to work?
Yeah, of course. So the first I'll say basis of it is that we are paid not to get the principal out of trouble, but rather to not bring the principal to a specific place, yeah, where it could be in danger, of course. And yes, by all means, the concept is that there's a lot more than just the risk management part. Uh, and we're talking about again just a complete framework because we will be speaking about policies, procedures, instructions, and competency-based training. Well, again, certifications. Um, then also another big part of it is that once you start handling data, sorry, my spelling. Anyway, so once you
Data,
start,
tomato, tomato, right?
yeah. So once you start compiling and using it, you are able to not just understand threat, vulnerability, risks, but you are able to also predict. Yeah. So
Okay.
predictive analysis, that's a very interesting area of developing for for this framework. Um, yeah, in order to do so, nowadays there is enough advances in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and a number of interesting things that could be applied. And interestingly, um, I do see the future for EP in a number of these things. Yeah.
So one of the concerns is is the data set too small?
Yeah, that's the first thing. We don't have enough data for, I'll say, day-to-day operations.
Mm,
That's true.
okay.
We do have enough data to perhaps go from the context, in when we're talking about um, managing or understanding geopolitical threats and trends. Yeah, there
Hmm.
is a lot of information there, so we can certainly make decisions on where should a executive or a traveler in general be, yeah, or
Hmm.
not, and
Hmm.
that could be pretty much predicted. Very simple. There is a lot of actionable information as far as understanding vulnerabilities, as far as organizational vulnerabilities,
Hmm.
vulnerabilities in a specific geographic area, like in the city,
Hmm.
districts. Yeah, that's also something that we could get. And yes, there is also enough information in some cases for some EP departments if they recorded enough, incident information, enough suspicions indicators, if they did a good job on recording actual threats, yeah. Um, and of course aligning that with making a good case on trailing digital digital trails for threats.
Hmm.
uh, we could start with something that could be actionable enough. Now, if you have a enough buy-in from your stakeholders, you could actually start compiling more and more information. Yeah,
Hmm.
and yeah, we could end up again not just uh, preventing, but even predicting. Yeah, where are we could where we could have a next attack and so.
Hmm. And I think as we define attack, it's either, embarrassment, right? It goes through it doesn't necessarily need to be assassination, but
Oh, for sure.
it could be any of the other attack vectors, right? Okay.
Yep.
Um, so it sounds like if you have a department of two or a department of 10, that's probably not gonna, I mean, that seems like a lot of work, right? Like is there any way to like ingest it and calculate it quickly, at least at this point?
At this point in time, no. What I've done so far has been the hard way, which is, dealing with Excel spreadsheets, maybe a little bit of a Power BI, and maybe just using some basic tools like Python and so.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, by all means, it's hard and it's slow. Yeah.
Right.
Um, you
But
know, yeah, but there's people that are a lot more clever than I. Data scientists and AI specialists that again, it's just a matter of pairing with all of this knowledge to someone that could make it actionable again on
Mhm.
on a platform.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's not difficult, and it's not out of reality for current terms. Yeah.
Really? Okay.
Part of my challenge again, and we're sort of speaking about that before, is that I was born and raised in Ecuador, South America. Yeah. So yeah, I'll say that technologically challenged country, and yeah, of course, lack of resources. And so even when we first met, that was interesting back then at the APSV Close Protection Conference. um Interesting or crazy, in my country we were having power cuts for 14 hours a day.
Mm.
Yeah. So yeah, anyways, the world is now very small, or smaller than before. So
Right.
I'm pretty confident that soon enough I could partner with the right people to develop something that could be usable at the different scales. Yeah.
So it's interesting. Like, it never even occurred to me that from a computing perspective or power perspective or any of those other perspectives, that it would be more of a manual process where you are versus here. I just always assumed that you had access to a supercomputer or something and you're running all your calculations and this was happening. But this is you at home, right?
Yep.
Mad scientist on your computer and only 10 hours a day. That's pretty impressive, you know?
Well, I have to run a business, of course, and
Yeah.
yeah, I have a few other current engagements. I'm a big fan of volunteering as well. A lot of my
Mhm.
time, so I do a lot of coaching, mentoring. Plus, I'm a voluntary leader at some organizations, ASAS, IFPO. So yeah,
Yeah, so you mentioned IFPO a couple times. What is IFPO, just for the listeners?
that's the International Foundation for Protection Officers.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Okay.
So anyway, so of course you're very familiar with ASAS, but
Mm-hmm.
ASAS is more of a corporate security manager and directors level organization.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the IFPO is pretty much the same, but for all the rest. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay.
in IFPO, it goes at all operational levels, operational level managers, supervisors, all the way up to security officers. Yeah.
Okay.
So back at the beginning of my career, I did learn a lot from it. And yeah, at some point I decided to also volunteer some of my time, assisting. They have some very interesting objectives and missions. Yeah, on again working with the boots on the ground people. Yeah.
Okay. So so I just want to make, because you mentioned that a couple times, I want to make sure that people knew what you were talking about. Uh that's important. And just to be able to distinguish the two organizations and the fact that you're a board member on IFPO, correct? Like you help
I'm
guide that?
a global board member of IFPO right now, yes,
Okay.
and I represent them in Latin America.
Okay. All right. So just to be clear, you're the big boss on that end. Oh, good for you. So as you talk about the risk management framework, what can you give us a couple, like, is there pillars? How does the risk management framework for EP, how does it stand?
Yeah. The well, there are a number of I'll say, yeah, pillars of it, or fundamentals. One
Hmm.
of them again is that this has to be a very well, I'll say, aligned teamwork, as I mentioned before, 4 tiers. So you get the corporate security manager, you get the EP dedicated team leader, then you get the EP agents, and the client, the product team. Now, every single one of them must in order to make it work properly, must understand that this is a continual improvement cycle, like ISO 9001 cycle. So you go through planning, doing, verifying, or studying, and acting. Yeah.
Okay.
Plan, do, check, that. And when you get the 4 levels doing of course their own stuff, which is different, but of course aligned, and each of them is doing this improvement cycle, then you can actually feed information from one level to the next, yeah, in a way that it is simple to assimilate and that it creates progress. Yeah.
Okay.
So far, what I found is that, the EP industry is sort of broken in the sense that corporate security managers have very little information that goes down to an EP team leader. And then EP team leaders are very bad at communicating with the agents. And then in turn, we're also really bad at working with clients or customers. Yeah.
Okay.
So again, aligning them with certain basics, foundations, understandings, common language, and so on will make us fly.
Okay. So what do you got? Like, do you offer a handbook? I mean, what is
So
it that people can use out of that? Or does each organization have to develop their own?
Yeah, what I did sort of put, of course, most of my findings, understandings that I could share with the general public. I published it in a series of books. Yeah.
Okay.
So this is actually going to be a series of 4 books. One for what a corporate security manager should know regarding EP. Then the second book again for team leaders, a third book for agents, and the fourth for the protectees, yeah, the clients themselves. I guess that's a bit of a starting point. I'm sort of actively looking, as I told you, for a partnership in order to develop I'll say a piece of software, yeah, and more specifically, artificial intelligence to actually make all of this work in a seamlessly and easy way, yeah, for because no one really likes doing the math and calculating and multiplying and all of that.
Right.
Plus, there's a lot of things that could be automated regarding reporting, transferring of information, accumulation of data, and so. So that's a second thing that I'm still sort of just starting to look for ways of working on that. And then, yes, of course, I'll say at some point, as this develops, I have good hopes that this could also bring in some perhaps even consulting, tasks, because I believe that there are a number of organizations that will benefit from it. The story of Babel Tower, yeah, from the Bible. So I do believe that in the EP industry, we had been cursed by this feeling of superiority that a few guys have, and trying to build their own language. And we have, again, several companies, several corporations that have a good, of course, and very respectful EP program, but it's kind of each company, each organization trying to speak their own language. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So a big part of what I'm an advocate for is of the development of standards, yeah, that will somehow make it possible for the whole industry to be able to speak the same language, and why not even start sharing and improving all together as an industry.
Right. So standards have been a topic of discussion for a long time, and I know that as is technical communities working on some. I know that IPSB is working on some, BEP squared working on some. But again, I think that just goes to show you talk about the different languages, different approaches. One of the things that Chuck always likes to talk about is a common operating language, right? And a common operating picture. So everybody's like talking about the same thing, understanding the same thing, and everybody's getting the same picture. It sounds like the books that you have, again, from strategic all the way down to the client, connect those dots, right? So if you're at the strategic level, you're going to understand what the client's role, function, and understanding should be. And if you're at the tactical level, you should understand what the strategic view is as you read through those, and that helps set you up for that risk management framework. And that's just the foundation of it, correct?
Oh yeah, yeah. There's a lot more to it. Um, Now, the fact is that, and you did mention that there are a number of EP specific standards that are being built.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I, of course, I do have good understanding of the whole process and all the nuances that this whole process has had. Um, but still, in this case, well, I decided to just go for it and create a framework based on all the other current standards that already exist. Yeah,
Oh,
because
really?
there is already a ISO 9001, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
quality management system standard. There is already a ISO 31000, which is for risk management in general.
Mm-hmm.
There is already a ISO 31030 for travel risk management.
Mm-hmm.
So there is also an ISO 18788, which is for security operations management systems.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, well, there are a number of other not closely related, but loosely related ISO standards like 45,000, health and safety, 27,001, which is for information security. So there are bits and pieces there that could be actionable in order to solve this puzzle. Plus, ASAS has also a number of guidelines which are already out there, ESRM, SRA, a number of different, well, there are a dozen of different guidelines regarding senior security executives, information security, and so. So, in my particular case, well, I pretty much developed all of this sort of independent from EP standards or EP specific standards, which
Okay.
I hope that we'll have them sometime this year. Plus, of course, as this is a individual project, well, I was the only one who wrote it all. It will be pretty simple for me to just make little changes and tweak it if we get these standards up and running.
Okay. So basically, you took a collective of ISO standards that applied that were directly related and adjusted them accordingly uh, to create the framework, right?
Yep,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay. And then you took some loosely related ones that you could kind of, fit some things in once the EP standard comes online, and then you can adjust those. Okay. That makes sense. I mean, there's no reason to reinvent the wheel, right? Just modify it a little bit. Like what is it? Build a better mousetrap, as they say, you know?
Yeah. So, just as a matter of full disclosure, I at some point I was selected to be a part of the technical committee at the creation of the BEPP
Mm-hmm.
and the BEPP standard and yeah, it kind of proposed a number of these ideas, but the leadership there, uh, they didn't appreciate it, uh, didn't accept any of my ideas, and eventually, yeah, it was sort of released from those activities. Yeah.
Right.
And then, of course, at some point, even well, when I was I was already a part of the ASAS um, uh, community,
Hmm.
and I kind of applied to be also involved in the ASAS standards subcommittee. I didn't make it back then. Yeah, so I wasn't able to again support the ASAS standard nor the BPP standard.
Interesting.
So I had to make my own kind of.
Right. But interestingly, your standard is based off of ISO, right? Which is
ISO and ASAS, yes, for sure.
right. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. So rather than make one from scratch, you said, "Hey, here's what I have." And that's how your risk management framework is based, essentially.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Plus, if you ask me, it makes somehow a bit more sense because um, not much in the US, but I'll say like global organizations, they do follow ISO standards. Yeah. So they normally do have their management systems which are ISO based,
Hmm.
and yeah, it will be, I guess, simpler for a executive rotation risk management framework once it's applied to a department to just align to organizations that already have a ISO 9001 or ISO 45001 or even those that have applied 31030.
Yeah. So you basically answered a question I was going to ask, which was ISO, not necessarily relevance, but I guess prominence. Because I mean, at one point, you couldn't turn your head without running into an ISO standard, right? And ISO certification, et cetera. And like you said, not so much in the US, but a lot of international companies still lean pretty heavily on ISO. How, did you see how that changed, or why did that change, do you think?
Well, you mean that why have they started following ISO
Yeah,
or
or these why did US companies, I guess, kind of drift away from it? That's probably my question. Because like you said,
the
not so
yeah,
much in the US, right? So
yeah.
it used to be like the standard and then it kind of drifted away. Just wondering if you had an opinion on it.
Yeah, my personal opinion on it is that somehow we got some really heavy players in the corporate world in the US.
Mm.
We're talking about companies that have the revenue of the country's GDP. Yeah, so
Right.
pretty much yeah, they are strong enough or big enough to just again create their own pretty much anything. They're as strong as a country, and therefore I'll say corporate America. Well, perhaps they feel that they don't need it. Yeah,
Okay.
whilst most of the other businesses, corporations, individuals out of the US, we do see a lot of importance on integrating on globally, speaking the same language and doing stuff in a similar way. Now,
Hmm.
uh, in the US, of course, you get the ANSI, which is the local representative for ISO.
Right.
So everything ANSI is still ISO because it has to follow or abide to ISO rules.
Hmm.
And yeah, ANSI is very big in certain industries or certain
Hmm.
areas like occupational health and safety. Is
Hmm.
everything is ANSI, which in turns, of course, is ISO. And yeah, when we're talking about materials, when we're talking about more engineering kind of stuff, everything goes more towards it. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I guess that was the focus for BEP squared to focus on the ANSI standard, right? Because then it would somewhat transfer to ISO or no?
ANSI
Or
is,
loosely.
the thing is that normally the way it goes is that you create perhaps a set of best practices in a group of, organization like a association or group of companies, whatever. And then these best practices can elevate to a guideline. So when you turn best practices into a guideline, then you have to start aligning with ISO, ANSI, and so. And then, of course, when those guidelines get agreed formally, then you can take it to a local level, which is in this case ANSI. And ANSI will take those guidelines and will strip them apart and will, of course, recreate them into a national standard. And then at some point, ANSI could even take this national standard and show it to ISO to see if it is applicable and whether there have to be some changes made in order for it to become an ISO international standard. Yeah,
Right.
So there's a progression to it. Now ANSI by default standards will be applicable to the US only, but they have to align with the process of ISO. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So the risk management framework, again, built off of ISO, again, a collective of previously written standards by which you made the risk management framework and applied it to executive protection. How did the EP ROI come out with the return on executive protection investment? How did that come about?
So, well, what are the main duties of a corporate security manager regarding EP? Well, first of all, you need to make some tough decisions about who you need to protect and who doesn't justify protection, yeah? And all different levels. So I call them profiles. So there will be executive profile groups that you need to assign all the workers in the company, yeah, which profile they go to. And there will be certainly some, of course, the most important, important in the sense that they have the highest probability and highest severity. They need dedicated protection, and then some others which will need some level of protection. Then you get like regular executives that will need certain, alternate protective methods, and then you get like I'll say staff really that they will need just certain guidance, and then some that you don't really care because they are taken care by health and safety. Yeah.
Okay.
So having said that, and having made these profiles for again assigning all the workers in a corporation to all of them, and of course making a rationale on of course what you need to do with them, then the next part was justifying it. Yeah.
Okay.
And I had to go again, and there was of course a general ROI and a general return over security investment formulas and ways of calculating it. But in this case, well, I sort of apply them to executive protection and had to make certain modifications because on EP we're talking about a expense. Is not an investment, it's an expense, yeah, by all means. But it's an expense that you can actually relate it to a return because it, of course, you can avert certain losses that will be, of course, bottom line. And we're talking about, you see, in the case of United Healthcare, it was thousands of billions of US dollars. Yeah, that was the impact on the company. But anyway, so you can avert some of those losses, and that can be calculated. And I came up with a formula to, of course, calculate the amount of losses that you avert. But when we're talking about EP, we have this specific top line return as well, which is very interesting. And that also needs to be calculated because the moment you are actually empowering your executives and allowing them to travel to places where they, or travel safely, of course, to places where they couldn't have originally. Or the moment you actually create a you instill this sense of confidence, from buyers, from clients, stakeholders, then the company not only averts losses but can actually add value. Yeah.
Okay.
So return over executive protection investment is a series of formulas and calculations where you can actually, again, account for all of those averted losses and value added that EP brings.
Okay, so on stage you had shown, and I don't know if it was well, a use case or
Yes.
a study that returned some pretty interesting numbers in using this, and in terms of our ROI for the EP investment. Can you share what those were? Because I thought that were pretty impressive.
Yeah. So it's basically what I told you, and yeah, in that case it was a business case. Yeah. I chose that specific business case because it was by a multinational company. It's a very well-known company, and they had their operations, in this case, in Ecuador. At some point, they came over and because I'm a vendor, so I provide EP services, secure transportation in different countries in Latin America. This company, of course, they trusted me from before, and they say, okay, we need a armed EP agent and an armored vehicle to protect a XYZ executive in this very difficult place where we're going to go to. And yeah, of course. So I said, okay, perfect. I can help you with that. But how long would you need that for? And they sort of came back and say, yeah, we don't really know, because this is a new country manager, and we are pretty much deciding whether we want to close the operation in that country or not. And that's where it all hit me and say, okay, can I go beyond my vendor hat, and can I explain to you a few of these concepts and all this? And would you allow me to actually do these calculations and present you a proposal? Yeah. So, in this particular case, I went through the whole process, of course, with information I had. And I ended up proving that, of course, by actually, implementing this concept of having different profiles for executives and different levels of protection for all of them. And actually, we run the whole system, in this case, specifically in Ecuador. Yeah, that's the country where I am, because we had plenty of information from here. And we managed to actually measure threats, vulnerabilities, risk, and factoring in all the actual expenses that we will have to implement this. We ended up showing that there would be a 800% return over the investment.
Wow.
And the best part is that they went for it, we implemented it, and that company decided to stay in Ecuador. That's interesting. And I will say that it was not just that initial 800% that I spoke of, because the company business grew over here, and they are prospering. And they are actually being able to work and live and travel throughout this, which I don't know if you're aware of, but Ecuador is now one of the most unsafe, unstable countries in Latin America. But they, with a proper executive protection risk management program, they had been able to just adapt to the realities here, and business just goes on. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. The 800% return on investment, right? And I think that it really goes to show, you talked about it a little bit before, is that EP, or executive protection, is an enabler, right?
Yes.
And that I think you said before, oh, there's a risk over there. Like we're going to avoid the risk, but it's not, we're not, but we allow the executives the ability to do more and focus on their roles as executives and not focus on their safety, which is that, I guess you could call it productivity at times and say, hey, this helps you become productive and essentially let us worry about the risk, or let us worry about the threats and the vulnerabilities. I know that is risk, but that's
Which
what we
is
do.
which is the original sense of what EP professionals are here for, and this is what we have done. But in this case, what I'm doing is proving that case with data, with
Mhm.
information, with numbers.
Mhm.
So of course, I'm not changing the nature, I'll say, of the industry, or wanting to change the way we run business in general,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
it's more about, again, speaking a business language, and being able to prove the business in order, of course, to have a more sustainable, I'll say, process, instead of just, again, running a, I'll say, or following orders, instead of just following orders,
Mhm.
becoming trusted advisors. Yeah.
Mhm.
I was once told that businessmen do not buy stories. They never buy, gossips or gut feelings. They
Mhm.
buy numbers.
Mhm.
Yeah, they
Yep.
understand numbers, and the moment you
Yes.
start showing these numbers, the moment you start explaining them, the rationale behind the process, and how these all came together like a little puzzle,
Mhm.
yeah, they buy in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's interesting. That's the secret. I mean, right? You say, you know, again, you can't sell fear, and that only lasts for so long. After a while, you have to start selling dollars and cents, right? And
Yeah.
how those dollars and cents, like how do they affect the bottom line, how do they affect the top line, and what the investment is and looks like, because at the end of the day, if you can't show that value, you're a cost, and that cost can be, like you said, hey, we're trying to figure out if we're going to keep this or not. Protection is one of those things that can be seen as a cost, and so if you have the opportunity from an an RO, return on executive protection investment, that's a good opportunity to show that. Do you share your equations, or where do people find those equations to be helpful, perhaps in their programs?
Yeah, it's some basic, or I'll say like the basic equations or basic information. You can just find it on my books. Yeah, you can
Mm-hmm.
find it there.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, due to I'll say space restrictions, yeah, a lot of I'll say the most complicated, or I'll say even the formulas, all of that. The most important part, well, it's not really on the books, but yeah, I'm willing to share it. I had been sharing that with a couple of companies that have approached me, and
Mm-hmm.
they're starting to see interest on this.
Mm-hmm.
Again, at a small scale so far. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yes. The fact is that when I had all of this, pretty much I got almost 1,000 pages of information on formulas and
Wow.
and and a number of other things, and when I took it to an editor, he told me, you're crazy. You cannot really publish a 1,000 pages book on this, and who's going to buy it, and yeah, then I came with the hard reality of how expensive it is to actually put diagrams and do the graphic designing in books and publishing and all of that. So I had to sell with a lot smaller, yeah,
Okay.
just a few hundreds here, really, yeah, pages.
Yeah. Oh, well, so yeah. Yeah. Sounds like you have all the secrets. All the secrets. That's good. So if somebody wants to buy the books, where do they find the books?
That's simple. You go to Amazon,
Okay.
and you go on Amazon and you check for executive protection risk management,
Okay.
or Kevin Palacios EPRM, and then you find it, yeah.
Okay. All right.
I
Well,
I decided to put it on Amazon because I'm not really on the business of selling books. Yeah,
right, right,
I
right.
don't want to uh, make an inventory and carry them and deliver them. I'm pretty sure that Amazon is the best in the world in doing that. Yeah, and yeah, the sad truth is that of course I hardly make anything out of selling the books. Yeah, but yeah, that's I guess my way of contributing to the industry at large
Mhm.
and to provoking some thought. Yeah.
Okay. So if I want to buy the books, or maybe let's say maybe I'm looking at the books and I need some equations now. Like what's a good start point?
Right now the only source will be myself. Yeah. Basically, yeah, if you want to go into more detail beyond what has already been shared in the books,
Hmm.
um, what I envisioned was to create a EPRM community. So it will be
Hmm.
a executive protection risk management community. And they started by creating a website where we could start again sharing some of these best practices and a number of other documents and the information and formats and so that I have. Um, and I guess, yeah, that will be a second source. There are a number of things that are out there that
Hmm.
couldn't fit the actual book.
Hmm.
But then on top of that, yeah, I am totally open to help if anyone needs. I can be there. Yeah.
Okay. And then the EP risk management community, where do you find that? Is that
So I created a website originally that's on eprm.online.
okay?
Um, don't criticize the design in the website. Of course, it's just starting. Yeah.
Fair enough.
But yeah, so the concept is that yeah, anyone who already bought the book, they will be able to have access to some additional material, which is there on the EPRM site. Plus, we will soon, it just need some time, again, develop some sort of again a board, so people will be able to share information, you
Hmm.
know.
Okay.
uh, I'm totally open at making translations and also applications to different industries. Yeah.
Hmm.
I want this to be organic, so anyone who's wanting to collaborate is all welcome. Yeah. And eventually, my next step is, as I told you, well, to develop some sort of a app, yeah, or will be a piece of software that
Hmm.
could be even located in that website, yeah. So yeah, so it could have a I'll say a global reach, yeah.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're really trying to create this community of um, a higher level approach to essentially the business of applying business to executive protection and putting executive protection in business. Is that accurate
Yeah,
or no?
you nail it. Yeah. The fact is that this is, or I made all of this because this is what I was looking for 25 years ago.
Hmm.
This is what I would have expected to exist. Yeah. This is what I was again paying for. Because I paid some really expensive training and I bought all the books on EP and so, and I didn't find this. And I'll say, yeah, that was a way of again having or building my own framework and building this community will be also in a way, giving back to the industry.
Okay. All right. I think that's interesting. I mean, again, you saw a problem or you were looking for a solution and you realized there wasn't one, so you created one yourself. I mean, very enterprising, and I think that you've done it alone is very, very impressive. Um, so I will say, number one, thank you, because I think uh, part of the challenge is that if we don't push ourselves to be better, we're always going to just remain the same, right? We'll always look up.
Agree.
I'm just here to carry a shield, right? And I think we can add a lot more value than that. That's kind of why we created the podcast, is to have higher level conversations around executive protection and security. So thank you for that. And then the next piece is if people do want to find you, where do they find you if they want to learn more, get your input, get an autograph on a book or 10, where do they find you?
Yeah, so I'm pretty simple to find. Right now, especially when I'm pretty visible because I'm the chair of the ASAS Executive Protection Community. So if you are an ASAS member, please join the community. It would be great to have you there, and there are a number of media to platforms to interact there. Um, Besides that, I'll say the easiest place to find me will be on LinkedIn. Yeah.
Okay.
So you go for Kevin Palacios, or my handle in a number of social media is Coach Seguridad. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's in Spanish again, but Coach and then Seguridad, which is security in Spanish, or
Mm-hmm.
safety as well in Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
And you look for Coach Seguridad in, again, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, you name it, you'll find me.
Okay. So, and that would, yeah, I definitely saw that on your LinkedIn page. So that's good. Um, awesome. So I'm going to ask you a question that I usually ask people. What question did I not ask you that you thought I would ask as in our discussion?
Yeah, I'll say you asked some of the right questions. My I thought you were going to make some more difficult questions or compromising, because you did mention at one point, yeah, if I get uncomfortable, I'll just tell you to stop or something. But I felt very, very comfortable. I'm very glad that we had this conversation. Um, I'm trying right now again, as I have this leadership position on ASAS right now.
Hmm.
Um, Honestly, what I'm trying is to try to stay away from all sorts of, drama and negativity that
Hmm.
is in some parts of the EP industry,
Hmm.
or by some individuals
Hmm.
specifically.
Hmm.
So maybe again, those will be some questions that I wouldn't have answered. Yeah, because again, I do feel that as an industry, we're in, because I know the security industry in general very well, because I've been involved again in a number of developments, and as a subset of the security industry, the EP portion of it um, is the most willing to collaborate, to again add, to multiply. uh, we work with ethics, we work with positivity. This is a part of the industry where, yes, I can be a vendor, like I am, by the way, in Latin America.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, in some cases, I can find sometimes where I can actually hire some of my actual risk management clients, yeah, to
Hmm.
work for me. I work for them. We respect each other's clients, and there's a lot of ethics, and that's great. That's
Yeah.
absolutely something great.
Yeah.
So again, questions about drama or negativity in the industry, I'm not going for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah, I just want to make sure that if you're like, hey, look, you should have asked this one question about
No,
this big Easter egg that's here, like
no,
I
no.
wanted to
If
make sure I got it.
well, the people at my company, again, and that's what they would say if they have the chance, because yeah, the fact is that, I do a lot of these things so far, again, uh, with with a positive intention of supporting or helping the industry.
Yeah, yeah.
I spend a lot of money, a lot of time here, and sometimes people in my own company, they start complaining and saying, "Wait, remember that you have a company. Remember that
Right.
you have to promote not your voluntary work. We spoke about about IFPO, or,
Right.
or what you're doing a volunteer for ASAS, or what you're doing here to these crazy ideas of EPRM and everything you're developing." And
Mhm.
they tell me, "Yeah, please tell them that there is a very trustworthy EP and secure transportation vendor for every country in Latin America, and that's called Helps LATAM." Yeah.
Okay.
So maybe
Okay.
that's the one question that my business manager will come. Hey, how come you never spoke about the company? That's like
Well,
that's it.
we'll make sure that gets in there. We'll make sure that gets in there.
Yeah, because that's
All right.
that's that's what puts food on the plate anyway.
Right on. All right, Kevin. Well, I really appreciate it. And Chuck and I will let you know when the thing comes out, and we'll go from there, huh?
Absolutely. It was a pleasure.
All right. Thank you very much. Have a great weekend.
The same to you.
All right.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
You are listening to Conversations in Close Protection. And now back to the boys.
Well, there you have it. Chris's conversation with Kevin on executive protection evolution, all things value, tech, and even a little bit of tactical thrown in there. So I think well done, Chris. I mean, that was a interesting conversation. I mean, and definitely brought up some provocative ideas around developing EP, how we think about business, how we think about business value, ROI, and something I was thinking as I listened, and I wrote this down, is like, through this whole conversation, like, are we protecting in the ways that I'm purposely being provocative, in the ways in which we manage and we think about EP now, Chris, are we protecting executives or limiting their potential? In other words, are we, by putting them in a protective box that's maybe traditional, are we limiting potential?
So I'm sure that's a rhetorical question.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna pretend that it's not, right? And I think that the whole idea behind having protection is that you're an enabler, not a disabler, right? And again, I think that this is where we sometimes forget that that's the case, is that avoidance doesn't mean that we don't go anywhere, right? We don't pay, whatever the corporate rate is for an EP manager and three EP professionals to go, oh, risk is too high, we're not going to go. Our job is to figure out how to get that done, how to get the business goals done without the risk. In other words, how do we work around that? How do we get in, get out safely, right? I mean, I think those are the things. Not to be like, look, you can't go anywhere; it's just too dangerous. So we're enablers, number one,
Right.
and then number two, I think it's a great question because the protector has to look at, I mean, at least in most cases, right? I mean, whether you're provided protection, ad hoc, or you're in business of providing protection, or you're a business that has to provide protection for its principals, is that it is a business, and you have to have that business approach to it. And then lastly is because we have such a low barrier to entry across the board for our industry, in other words, somebody can say, you know what, I'm an EP professional tomorrow, and we accept that, right? We have to understand what that looks like and how that impacts us. And we have to understand those first two items that we talked about in order for that second one to have any validity.
No, I think you're right. The idea of, like, our job is not to say no. Our job is to say, if you wish to do this, here's, like, for example, you might say, hey, I want to go to Ukraine and have a business meeting. Many might just say, nope, we're not going to do that. Reality is our job is to say, if you wish to do this, here are the means that we need to put in. Here's the risks. And here's what we need to do to minimize the risks. And here's the cost of that. Here's option 1, option 2, option 3. Option 3 might be, instead of meeting Ukraine, let's meet in Poland, or, let's meet in Paris or whatever. And then it's up to the business to say, okay, this is the one we choose. But at the end of the day, there's a cost with that too. It's not just like, hey, if we go to Ukraine, we need like 15 people. Well, if you go to Ukraine, we're going to need the following. It's going to mean this. This is the bottom line. So if you believe this meeting is worth, arbitrarily, $300,000, then by all means, let's get it on. Or maybe option 3 is we bring somebody that we're trying to meet with out to us in Poland, and maybe that's
right.
100,000. Well, great.
Right.
We're doing that.
Right. And I think it's great that you stated there's nothing wrong with the first answer being, can we do it someplace else? Right? Because the objective is we need to have this meeting, right? The where may or may not matter. And so I think that's an important piece. Like, does it have to be here? Yes. Okay, great. Then it helps. I know what I need to do to attack that problem, right? And so I think that's a very, very good point. And then it goes back to, right, the business side, or the ROI is, okay, great. What does that look like? And I think that's the other piece too, is that sometimes, in an industry where the customer sets the price for the most part, right? The customer goes, well, that's a little too much. Like, we have to start looking at the total cost. What does that look like? And what does it cost for that business meeting, that business acquisition, whatever they're doing, right? I mean, people spend hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars to do proposals, because the return is exponentially higher than the input, and I think this helps us understand that.
I think sometimes as an industry too, I probably was guilty of this as a young man when I first started my business back in the late 90s, of, gosh, I'm going to lowball what I'm doing because I'm afraid they're going to say no. And because they're going to say no, that I won't get the work. And that I really didn't fully understand that, wow, to do this job for Chris Story, I am actually losing money, even though there's money coming in my pocket, because I didn't quite understand, or I don't want to say I didn't understand. My brain refused to accept that I'm losing money on this, because I was more excited to get the work. And I'm not saying like there's something to getting the work and having it in your CV too, but there's a point at which, I think you said earlier, there's, the barrier to entry is limited, if at all. And you get folks in that kind of, like, it almost messes up the ecosystem too. Like, oh, I'll do that for $70, when in fact it's probably a $500, detail.
Right.
So now what are we doing to the kind of like the generalized cost of the service across the board? We're reducing that. And then there's maybe some knockoff effect where like you're saying, the buyer doesn't quite understand the cost of security or the cost of protection, because in their brain, they have a skewed view of the risk, and a skewed view of what it costs to mitigate.
Yeah. And so I think the great thing about what Kevin does and is doing is that it allows you to, with this formula and his work over so many years, it allows you to really share that with your customer, if you have the right amount of information, right? And but here's the deal: you can always just ballpark it, right? Like, you can always go based off the cost. Like, hey, we're flying private from point A to point B, cost of doing business, but that cost of doing business gets associated with that client, that customer, or gets cut across, EMEA, or whatever it is that you want to cut across. And so us understanding what those costs are and how security adds to the total cost, it just becomes the cost of doing business. And then you look at what risk you reduce.
Well, I liked in the conversation where you guys were basically talking about, like, business people don't buy stories. and I might butcher this quote, but like they don't buy stories, they don't buy gossip or gut feelings, they buy numbers. So, and I think it's an interesting in thinking about like everything's data driven now. I mean, for crying out loud, I get more data from my phone about how many breaths I've taken or times I've winked, than anything now. And so, but it's how are we taking what's the data we need in EP to help sell the value and make the case?
Yes.
I think that's a lot of where the conversation was getting to. And I thought that was an important piece to take out of this, like for us to remember, like they're not like, I get it. My gut says this is bad. I'm all for gut instinct, and there's some science behind that too. But
I
at
got
the
a
end of the
bad
day,
feeling here, Chief.
yeah, yeah. Oh man.
Bob,
What was that?
the
I don't know if
platoon.
you're up on current history, but we just got our asses kicked.
Yeah, aliens.
But I like that idea of like, of course, you tell stories and there's gut instinct, all that's involved in it. But at the end of the day, decision is being made on numbers. Obviously, probably there's sometimes when it is made on gut instincts and this and that, but they're not going to buy on the gut instinct. They're going to buy on the numbers and the data that you provide them.
Right. And I think that becomes extremely important to understand because number one, you have to understand who you're talking to, right? You gotta realize and recognize what room you're in, right?
Yeah.
And you have to be able to read the room because there is an emotional aspect to it, right? Like out of literally after the Thompson piece, none of those were about numbers. It was all emotional. Right. Well, a significant portion was emotional, but they were numbers driven. How do we protect our CEO? But really is if the CEO gets hit, what's the how does that translate into dollars,
I
right?
mean, look,
How do we protect our shareholder value? What does that look like?
and we know the numbers and it's likely changed, but I think we reported it here too. I mean, after Brian Thompson's murder back in December, 63 billion with the B hit to the overall organization. I mean, those are real numbers. I mean, and those are things I hope
Yep.
people are tracking those numbers and keeping them because those are numbers that I think you want to talk to when you like, look, this is somebody that was fairly unknown, said he
Right.
didn't want security. There were some indicators that some things were going on in the background, but at the end of the day, there was an opportunity by an assailant who took it. And as a result, the company took a $63 billion hit.
And I think the company, but also its shareholders as well,
Yes.
right? So
Good
now
point.
the piece that we have to understand is that look, security protects shareholder value, right?
Yes.
Executive protection protects shareholder value, and as long as you're, again, with the EPROI, right? As long as the spend is relative to the cost of mitigation, then you're good to go. Like everybody doesn't get a private jet, you
Yeah.
know.
Well, and
But does it make sense, to us to name your risk treatment, at the cost of $100,000 a quarter or whatever it is per overseas trip or whatever it is, right? I mean, those numbers are somewhat irrelevant after that.
yeah, no, but I did like I do like it's interesting also thinking like the primary decision-making tools in EP, if data and predictive analytics, I'm just, assuming data and predictive analytics based on the conversation become the new decision-making tools, are there skills then that become obsolete? And by the way, I'm not talking about the skills of shoot, move, communicate, get the principal off the X. I'm just thinking more broadly, what are
Your bow staff skills, as we like to
my
call them.
ninja skills? Thanks, Napoleon. My Liger fighting skills. Are there skills that become obsolete, or are there just more skills in the toolbox that we're required to maintain?
So yes and no, right? I mean, I think that's the whole idea is that there should be skills that remain obsolete or become obsolete because there's a different skill that needs to replace it, right? Those martial skills that you talked about, those baseline skill sets for protectors that everyone thinks that you come to the table with when you stand there, right? Everybody believes you're a freaking, from SEAL Team 6 or wherever you told them you were from, they believe that those skills are in place, right? You don't have to go walk around and talk about them and tell people like, whatever. The part that
Well,
they
like
really
as
want
I've
to
heard you
know,
say many times on the show, and you and I have both done our fair share of training in the industry too. Like, okay, show me.
right? Like, and you can't really, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's a security proof thing, not an
But
executive proof,
but
right?
but
But
I think in this context, though, just for everyone listening in, this isn't Chris and I saying like you don't need to train martial skills. We're not
oh
saying
God,
that at
no,
all. This is a business
no,
discussion. This is the business of
yes,
EP. And by the way, if you're not working on your business as much as you're working in your business, and you call yourself a CEO or director of your company, you need to get down and give us 50 push-ups right now, because you need
that's
to be
cute.
thinking about this stuff weekly.
Yeah. Well, so what we are saying is that it doesn't matter what quote unquote skills you have, is that your client and customer believes that you come to the table with all those skills anyways, right?
Yes.
You don't have to go, hey, here's what I do, right? Oh,
Actually,
you're
could
RMDP, okay, great, and then they move on,
could
right?
could I just offer one slight verbiage change based on something I learned from Tony Robbins? I think that's the hallucination that the clients have
Yes,
that you
I knew you
bring.
were
And
coming
I've
with that.
used that word purposely, because their
Yes,
hallucination and your reality may not be intertwined there.
correct. That is correct, sir. Yes. And I
But
think that's the hallucination, right? And as soon as you're in place, then they're happy, right? And then the challenging piece where you shift from the story to the numbers is when you have to, and I usually hate this word in security, but it's a business discussion, is that when you have to justify the cost.
yeah, but it's I hate the word too, but it's not, oh, that'll never happen here. It's not, it will happen at some point. I remember
Mm-hmm.
talking to somebody once and they were starting an EP program. I sat down with them. I said, "What's your budget?" And Chuck, you don't understand. This is different than anything else. We don't have a budget. I said, my response was, everybody has a budget. You just don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So my advice is either set one and make that the standard, or go find somebody and say, what is our budget here? Because somebody at some point is going to ask, why are we spending money on a private plane? Or why are we spending money on additional car? Or what is this surveillance detection that we spend money on? And at that point, you better have a budget, and a budget to risk that you can talk about, because just because it's dangerous is not going to make it when you're standing tall in front of the CFO.
Right. And that's such a vanity statement, right? Oh, we don't have a budget, bro. Like, okay,
I know. I
you
was
know,
like, okay, meeting's
calm
done.
down.
You can
Right.
pay for lunch then.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, again, it's reading the room, right? And just trying to understand what impact you have.
Yeah.
And none of this is about you, right?
Yeah. Oh,
It's
yeah.
all about your customer, your client. It's about, how do I keep them safe from whatever it is that I'm protecting them from, right? And again, your risk treatment, the solution, should be relative to the risk, you know? And and
Yeah.
and what Kevin's talking about is, how do I define that in numbers, right?
Right.
And
Well, that's like,
when I saw that, I was like, oh shit, this guy has the secret, right? This is the secret right here. This
well,
is
think
what
about it.
everybody's trying to solve, you know?
And our clients, whether you're a high net worth family, an NGO, or a multinational corporation, if you can define the risk in a risk matrix that has numbers around it, now you can create common operating information and language that you can get around the table and say, here's where we're talking about risk. To you in the individual, to us, the company, and then here's how I'm going to mitigate around that. This is a level 5. We all know that's bad. Level 1 is low or unknown, depending on your philosophy. But I thought that was good. And I agree. He is probably going to be the soothsayer and all that.
Mm-hmm. And going back to the whole monetization piece, I mean, if people take nothing away from this other than if I need somebody to come in and help me with a pitch, it's this guy, right? Like,
Yeah.
hey, Kevin, what's your daily rate? I need to, I need to have this conversation, right? And I think that becomes important,
And I think there's something to that, Chris. I know it's kind of tongue in cheeky, but I think there's something to that. Again, like we come into the industry as security people and we're business people. That's a tertiary task or it's an implied task or it's by necessity, as I said early on, I've said a few times. And these are skills that we need to practice. Like, look, putting together a pitch and putting together a scope of work and putting together an RFP is damn hard work. I mean, I've spent a few weeks putting together an RFP. I'm sure you have as well, and just trying to get it right and understand the costs and all those things. It is time consuming, and it's just hard work. And I think understanding somebody like a Kevin or, we have, other people out there that say, look, I've gone to business school or I've got enough, 10,000 hours or whatever, where I can help you do this. Anytime someone would ever offer a class or a seminar and something to kind of like up it's just like the stuff you guys did at the Close Protection Conference. Like people should take those things all the time because that skill, those types of classes from people with actual track records and success are far and few between that are willing to come out and say, I'll help you with it.
No. And I think, but the but is the but, right? But do I need that? I mean, the answer, do I really need that in my career? Do I need that at this point in my career?
Yes.
Right. And the answer is
yes.
The answer is whether you think so or not, security is a big picture function. Well, let's put this, maybe not security, right? But executive protection is definitely a big picture function. And I think because you're at the CEO level most of the time in corporate, or you're at the high net worth you're at the high net worth or ultra high net worth level almost all the time, if you look at it that way.
Well, I'm involved in the ASIS International CSO roundtable, and I chaired a discussion a few weeks ago that was a discussion about EP for CSOs.
Okay.
And I started by saying, look, everyone in the room, EP is your number one or number two line of effort. Again, it doesn't matter, what your company does or what you do, or, at the end of the day, in your first or second line of effort is EP, and it will always be. And if it's not stated, it's definitely implied. Even if it's like, we don't need anything here, we're fine, nobody knows us, there's still an implied task that you are monitoring and managing the protective effort from the highest intellectual and business aspects of your organization. And to talk about protection, because I think you mentioned it early on, there is an emotional aspect to it. If I'm the CEO, you're talking about protecting me. One, that's bringing my ego. I don't mean my hubris. It's bringing my ego into the conversation. That's either frightening to me, unsettling, or perhaps maybe it even inflates my ego. But it's bringing an ego, and an ego is always going to come with emotion with it. So now you have to kind of do your best to put it back into a framework that says, hey, we're talking about you, but we're putting it in such a way that the business now can weigh in. Otherwise, it's just going to end up being Chuck Randolph in his hubris or his ego and how all that means. Whereas, in fact, now, post Brian Thompson and other activities going on, it's becoming more of a, like we said earlier, a shareholder discussion.
Yes. Right. And it's, again, it goes back to that protecting that business value. And I think one of the things that really allows protectors to get in the room, like you like to say, or to be in the room, is to recognize that, because that's the only connection that you have usually with the top tier of the organization, unless something has gone extremely pear-shaped. So as you say this, is that something that you would be willing to give up just because nobody knows who our CEO is. But it has to be a line item, like you said. It has to be a line item, and for you to give that direct connection to that to the C-suite is really foolhardy.
Well, in some ways, I think there's this old adage of like low risk or unknown risk, and I tend to be one that says the risk in a certain area might be low, but ultimately it is unknown because, not to be Rumsfeldian, but we don't know what we don't know, which is why we continue through OSINT, protective intel, and other things to always be striving to minimize the unknown so we can make a data-driven discussion. So, but I think you're right. Like even at like, hey, Chris, I'm coming in to you. You're the COO. I'll report to you and I say, hey, look, our overall risk here is low, but we maintain a protective intelligence stance to monitor against the C-suite because there is a certain sense of unknown that we don't understand. And if it pops up, it could have, it could suddenly change the paradigm, if you will, of our risk overnight. So we're always going to monitor that. I think you,
overnight.
the COO, I think says, okay, Chuck Randolph, my CSO or my lead EP, he gets it. He recognizes that we believe it's low, but he's going to always continue to monitor because you just don't know what's going to pop up.
Right. And so that becomes that, and then the discussion becomes, okay, great. I approve. Go talk to finance. That's a completely different discussion, right? And I've got to understand those numbers are going to come up,
Yeah. What did you say earlier? Like read the room and then read the next room and the room after that too.
Right. And then the finance person goes, well, what, you want to spend, $400,000 a year to keep the CEO safe. That's a pretty big line item for security. And you go, yes.
And
then here's why.
Yep.
And this is where Kevin's discussion becomes very, 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 or his framework, right? And that discussion becomes very, very important. And I think the thing that you said just recently that really resonated is that you have to have that in your risk framework and your risk knowledge, right? As you report that to your COO or your CEO, is you have to have the portion of unknown risk that you can't control. Because I think with OSINT and all these other things, we think that we've got 100%. But you know what? If I go to Chipotle and I freaking this is a fictitious example based on reality, right? If I go to Chipotle and I order food for my daughter and it's the normal thing we always order, and it comes out to freaking $48.50 or whatever the hell it is, right? For two people at Chipotle, a teenage girl and myself, that hits you right in the wallet. So if I say, hey, fuck it, let's do it live. Where does that guy live? I'm going to give him a piece of my mind. That's not going to be on OSINT anywhere. Right? So you have an unknown risk, which has unknown capabilities, right? From your perspective, right? Do you assume that the person is just some rando, or do you assume that they're trained and skilled and there's a level of threat within that? So you have to understand what that unknown threat is, and you have to be able to articulate what those unknown threats capabilities are. Now, we don't go, hey, so that we need to make sure that the car bombs and freaking 50 cals can't penetrate the residence. Like, okay, you're getting a little bit too crazy. But based off of best practice, based off of known risk, based off of highest probability, and then you work your way back where your risk tolerance is from there. That's the discussion that you have to have.
Right.
For that unknown risk piece, right?
And I know there's people out there right now just like consternating, like, no, that's low risk. Or I'm a big fan. I think it's both. I mean, I do. The environment might be low, but you just don't know. I mean, to your Chipotle example, I mean, I remember several years ago, I went and got my normal at Chipotle, and then I got food poisoning for 5 days. I mean, and what if that would have set somebody off? Like I lost money, I did this, and now I'm going to go after whomever. And
right.
a certain set of skills or something. Something I thought, you see what I did there?
Yes, I did.
Couldn't use my Liam voice though. something you guys also talked about, I thought was kind of cool, is like the idea of that it's kind of the basics of ISO 9000 or 9001, which is the QMS management standard. And I did go and look that up because I was like, okay, this is interesting. I mean, you have an international, and let's come to the standard. We'll come to this standards discussion in a second. But I was thinking about like, now you have an international person with an international look. I'm going to go to ISO immediately, and I'm not surprised. But then I went and looked it up, and I was like, it actually is a pretty good understanding or a pretty good idea, I thought, of ISO in terms of that, like quality management, customer focus, leadership, engagement of people, process approach, continuous improvement, evidence-based decision making, which yes, and then relationship management. I mean, I don't know. I just wanted to bring that out. I thought that was pretty smart of him to say that.
Well, I think so. Yes, I agree. I think the smarter piece is that before he tried to create a standard, he goes, what existing standards are out there that I could either emulate or modify, right? And I think that's the piece to me, which is important, right? Because it's already recognized,
right?
Right?
And that's
You're not
how you
trying to
get
create
to
your own thing.
And I know people's brains are about to melt when I say this, but that's how you get to that recognize. You got to go out and find out what's already done, what's similar that we can learn from that will inform what we're doing.
Right, which makes sense. I mean, regardless of what you want it to be, and again, the keys in this were, like you said, were international, right? So obviously you would go to international standard, which makes sense.
Well, and I did. I went and I looked it up and said, okay, I need to understand this. I'm dealing with some ISO 27001 and things now for some other things we're doing at work. And I just kind of spun over and looked at this and I was like, it actually makes sense to me in terms of, look, we're an industry right now, and there's a lot of discussions about standards and how we're, where we are. But I think if we're, Randolph and Story Inc., and we want to do something to say, as I've heard you say many times before, we say we're good. How do you know? I could see, like, in a vacuum, let's pick something like this and just say, we're going to base what we do on this standard, loosely based on the standard. We follow this in our own philosophy and things that way. Do we need to go get certified? I'm not saying everybody needs to do that. I'm just saying we could take this in our own philosophical framework now and make that part of our business engine.
Yeah. And then, you say, at least when we grade our homework, we grade it against this standard, right?
Yeah.
And when we send our surveys to our customers, we give them this standard
based on this
to judge us by, right? Which I think then you can go, well, yeah, okay, great. That's amazing, But the is that, who's doing that?
Well, and honestly, people probably aren't thinking to do it. It's like probably like, hey, Chris, I got a good idea. But I would say, like, if people are out there trying to understand their own business, like, how do I try to grade my own business in a place that really doesn't have a rubric? Well, here's one that you could use loose. And again, you could go to someone like Kevin or other people out there and say, hey, help me look at my program, assess my program, but I'd like to assess it against these standards, and here's where I grade, and they come in and tell me where I am.
And really, it goes back to the part of that discussion becomes, well, what's in it for me, right? Like this sounds like it's going to cost me a lot of money, so why do I care, right? And the reason that you care is because it helps you align in those conversations. Because one of the questions that we always hear is, how do I get to the decision maker? How do I get beyond the
how do I get to the decision maker and the check payer? Yeah.
Right. I'm a subcontractor for X. I want to go direct with the client. How do I get there? Well, this is the way, right?
Yeah.
I didn't go like Mandalorian, but really, this is the way.
But it is the way.
Yeah.
I also I enjoyed and was curious about the part of the conversation in which you guys were talking about standardization and professional development. And, again, the idea of like, I think what was said was in the industry, we've been coerced by the feeling of superiority that a few guys have in trying to build their own language. And the discussion you were having is how do we break down the industry language barriers to create, as I love to say, common operating information, but that common operating language that would lead, in this case, to a common operating picture of where are we to create industry standards and language, and at what level do we need to do that? I mean, clearly Kevin, in his role at ASIS International has some ideas about this, but I know this is something that's, near and dear to you as well.
Well, I think it should be near and dear to everyone, right? Because really the question becomes, are we really having the right discussion? Not what language should we use? Should we use this or that? Is like, how do we translate that language into the predominant language, which is the language of business, right?
Yeah.
And so there's the, like when you talk about telling the story, right? Tell the story, but tell the story with numbers. That's the language of business. You talked a little bit earlier, you kind of alluded to parity. One of the things that we have a challenge with is that because we're a low level maturity industry and we refuse to change, which kind of keeps us there, right? If you look at cyber's a little bit higher level of maturity and higher level of barrier to entry, and so lo and behold, it has its own language. And so when you see that coming into the business space and you see it predominant within the conversations that you're having, it can be frustrating because now you have to learn a whole new language, and the language isn't one for one, right? Risk comparisons are an excellent example, right? You talked 1 to 5, right? For us, level 1 or level 0, whatever you use, but usually we use a 5 category, is the lower number is a lower priority. In cyber, the lower number is the higher priority. It's a priority. We go off of criticality, right? And they go off of a priority. And I think there's one place that we're significantly offset with that language, opposing. And we need to make sure that we understand what that is.
And I think you're dead on, my friend. And I think this is something everybody needs to hear is like, first, we're not talking about is Spanish or German or English or Mandarin the language. We're talking about the language of business and alignment across domains. And what we mean by that, and I think it's important to highlight that, like cyber 0 is bad, physical 0 is good. Beyond the fights that we may incur at individual levels, we need to get to that first. Like, let's align the risk domain so that we all understand red is bad, green is good. 0 is bad, 5 is good. Yellow is yellow and blue is blue. And here's how we look at things like the attack cycle. Here's how we look at mitigation. Here's how we look at risk and align those up by domains. And now I think as a bigger risk industry, as my dad used to say, you're cooking with oil, which means you're doing things right because we're having discussions that now resonate and show alignment to the C-suite, to the board of directors, to the shareholders. So when we go and talk to them, we're automatically aligned with risk across the board.
Correct. And I think even just having that discussion and having that, that freaking that categorization makes an abundance of sense so that you can make sure that you're like, oh, great, we're at 0 risk. Nice. We'll move on. Like, whoa, the cyber guys lose their minds.
They're like,
so again, So again, just important discussion on differentiation, but aligning behind whatever those risks are. And then again, being able to tell the story about what the ROI is. And again, if you use cyber as an example, cyber can directly point to numbers and say, well, we're always in a reactive mode. If I spend 10% more, we won't have to react anymore. We can be preventative. And you go, this investment will equal this return, right?
Yes.
On X.
Well, it's
because their knowns are higher probability than the physical security are.
And they are, I mean, look, on the cyber side, there's things like the MITRE ATT&CK framework and all these things that people are developing ad nauseum that I think we lack. Although I think we're, with people like Kevin, we're slowly coming, we're coming up. But I think, like, here's a basic example. Left to bang and left to boom. It's the same damn thing. We just cyber folks. We each have to have our own language to make it cooler.
Right.
Who gives a rat's ass?
It's
Like, before shit
stupid.
happens, here's what we need to do. After shit happens, here's reaction. And I always find that frustrating because I think to myself, like, why we're fighting to see who has the larger voice and why we're fighting with our domain hubris, bad actors could care less. They don't give a shit. You're just waiting to find a crack to come in and do the thing they need to do. Whether that's drop some ransomware, steal some IP, attempt to have a sitting at your organization, or God forbid, murder your CEO.
Right. Well, I think so. So here's the thing that we talk about and don't talk about, though, with the cyber piece, is that why is cyber more prevalent? Because it's easier to accomplish from your couch. Okay.
Oh yeah.
So if it's easy to accomplish from your couch, right? Then what's there might be criticality of the business, but to people, like the people safety thing, which executive protection is their priority, there's limited, right?
Right.
But the difference is, a great example would be last night, right? Did you watch UFC? So I won't give you the numbers.
I was over at the TEP.
Oh, that's right. So I didn't watch it either because I believe the hackers that hate Dana White were messing up the program, right?
Yeah.
So if you look at effort to effectiveness, right, a lot of people were blacked out and they didn't get to watch what they wanted, right? That's easy. It's harder to go, you know what? I'm going to grab my shit and go down and fuck somebody up, right? That's a bigger decision point, right? It's a harder leap to make for a lot of people, right? A lot of people would be very passive. The active piece is very different. So if you have that cyber conversation, you go, well, why are they doing that? Because it's easier for me to fuck with you. It's harder for me to do this if I'm going to do it physically, because the repercussions of me doing so are significantly greater, right?
Well, here's the converged piece in that too. Now, because we know cyber enables minimal to high-level threat actors. So if you think about nation states that have limited resources can do just as much damage as those that have more. And it kind of, in some ways, as that discussion, but now let's put this into an EP perspective, because I think you're onto something here, Chris. The same group or individual that's sitting on their couch can also say, oh, I'm just going to go find all of Chris Story's personal information and drop it online or drop it on Reddit and see if I can stir the pot and say, hey, which we saw this happen post Mangione shooting Thompson.
Mm-hmm.
Great. I hate these people too. Here's his address. So now we're getting into what a converged conversation, where we need to not have this confusing left to bang, right to boom, north, south, 0-5, and say, look, regardless, Chris Story's personal information and his address and his daughter's address have just been put online.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What are we doing about that?
Yep. And I think here's the other piece too, is that, and again, this goes directly to this conversation, is that if you look at security's role and function in life, it is to do one thing, and that's prevent incidents. But prevention is hard, because I've got to look at what's coming down the pipe. I've got to look at my risk. I've got to look at all this other things. And so when you look at that bang or boom or fuckery or whatever you want to call it, right, that incident, most security treatments are based around that incident, just immediately prior, but mostly in response. And our focus is prevention, i.e., as a company that you're familiar with, is changing the trajectory of the threat as far away as possible from the protected asset, right?
Chris,
and I think we lose that in a lot of aspects, right? Security is prevention; it is not response. Well, it encompasses response, but at like 10%.
But let me add something to that. I was thinking about when you said that, it just kind of a couple of neurons fired, which is good for me at my age. So thank you. Or maybe I just passed gas. I'm not sure, but I 100% agree with you. We are preventers. So I'm thinking about Dan Heath's book, and sorry, Dan, I can't think of the name of it, but I think by and large, and if you think differently, let me know. And if you guys think differently out there, protectiontalk@outlook.com. By and large, I think as an industry, we view ourselves as first responders. When in fact, back to Dan Heath's book, we are first preventers.
Yep.
And we should view ourselves as first preventers. By the way, I'm not taking anything away from the amazing first responders that help people every day. I'm just saying the protection domain is not. We should really double down and view ourselves as first preventers. I think you're onto something there. In his book, Dan, he talks about that too. Like, look, there's many accolades as there should be for first responders. Absolutely. There should be parades every day for everyone that helps the community in the way it does. But there's rarely anything out there that says the first preventer.
Right.
Because
and that becomes the business story, right? Right. Yeah. So yes, we focus on response in the event of, right? As a matter of fact, response is probably the first thing you're going to put in place because you've got to understand what all the other threats are that you need to freaking deal with. But as you go, you ensure that response is capable, and then you move away from that to start preventing as far away as possible, which into physical security space, which is why we have deter, detect, delay, defend, whatever else you want to throw in there. And I think we forget that.
Well, in his book, Dan talks about, he uses a discussion around like, hey, we see kids floating down the river. Everybody's jumping in the river, bringing them out. And finally somebody was like, well, I'm going to walk upstream and see what the heck is going on and prevent that. Well, nobody sees what's happening, as my hand is off camera here, but everybody sees this. So I think you're onto something. And we want to sell the thing we can see because it's visible. Chris, give me a quarter and I'll give you a pencil, and you have a pencil. Give me a quarter and I'll make sure you get to your car to the best of my ability, unimpeded, in the most rapid and safe and secure manner as possible.
Yeah. And I think you have to remind people of that, right? Like for example, I get to hear, hey, why do we have that medical bag? Well, because we carry it with us everywhere, but I couldn't get into the car fast enough before you got there, right? That's the real answer, right?
Sure. But
the answer is that
I didn't want you to see it.
Yes, but we carry it everywhere in the event of, right? Oh, that's crazy. Is it? Okay. But that's my job, right? And that's a response piece, right? Or I cannot, and then I'll just dial 911.
Or the executive looks at you and says, well, what is it about me that you think that either A, I'm weak, or something's wrong with me, or, again, that like unintended hubris walks in. It's like, there's nothing wrong. What do you think, something's going to happen here? And it's like, no, we don't know. It's unknown.
You could be a ticking time bomb as far as I know, health wise, right? But then again, right, you have the conversation, and I've been asked before, like, well, we really haven't had to deal with anything. And I said, no, you're right, because we've been ahead of it, right? And that's the point at which the response was a reflection, and then understanding, yes, we have, right? So we have to be able to have those conversations, right? You got to be able to stand your ground of what you do in the prevention place and space, and that's 90% of the domain that we're in, and I think sometimes we forget that. And again, going back to Kevin's messaging is you can articulate that in a business case.
And I think you're onto something there. And maybe there's a formula in this we need to work out for a blog from CICP or something around the formula of that discussion. Why do we have this? I need to stand my ground because it's necessary, and here's the data behind it. And you're absolutely right. If you show your math 3 or 4 times, they'll stop asking.
For sure. And it could be a simple demographic.
But if they ask to see your math, you're like, I don't know, I use ChatGPT. Well, you're going to get questioned all the time because now suddenly your mental frameworks are in question.
Right. And here's the deal. This is free, right? and again, free is should be suspect, but we'll just talk about it anyways. Is that you could use chat? We'll use the medical for example, right? Why do you carry a medical kit with you, right? Well, we carry medical kits because from headaches and boo-boos to God forbid, gunshot wounds and everywhere in between, right? There's a probability that we will need one of those things depending on where we go, how many people we have, et cetera. But the demographic of who we protect has these known medical issues. You can grab that right from ChatGPT. So when we're all together, there's a high probability that we might have a medical issue. So we carry this just in case because I'm right here and capable, and emergency response is 8 to 12 minutes away. Does that work for you? Works for me. That'll never ask that question again.
Keep moving. And next time I ask Chris, better not, because I know he's going to have an answer.
Right.
Because
do you have the bag?
He understands. That just shows you understand your craft, and it's not just like, come with me if you want to live. Bullcrap.
Right. And those are the numbers, right? That's why I do what I do, right? So yes, do I use AI to help me articulate what my message is and to look at my data and compile it and analyze it for me? 100%. But I can't just go, well, let me just chat GTP that shit, and I'll have an answer for you in 30 seconds,
Well, and I did enjoy you guys talking about technology as an EP enabler, and this is not a new conversation, by the way. I mean, we talk about tech in EP, as long as I've been in EP, that's always been a discussion. But I do think the idea of like machine learning and AI applications are important. What did y'all say? Like the future of EPs and a number of things like AI and in machine learning. But it's becoming more sophisticated in areas like threat management or threat assessment, risk management. I don't think it will replace human intuition anytime in my lifetime.
Nope.
But I am curious to see what will it accelerate or enable in terms of EP, in terms of advanced work, or just, I think for me at the end of the day, I think it will do a lot of collecting. I think there's a couple things, and I actually think we need to find and do a show on AI and EP if nothing else, to help kind of level set and say, look, here's what it is, here's what it isn't. Stop with all the Terminator stuff. I know it's creepy, but here's where it enables. And I think there's a couple aspects. One, there's a data lake of information that the Chris and Chuck EP team has that AI might be able to help us do things in terms of trend analysis, skills analysis, other things. But then I think there's a bit of generative AI, which is just one aspect of it that would allow us to say, look, it's going to accelerate and enable my ability to get advanced reports done more quickly, to pull information, to analyze, to do OSINT work, to do protective intelligence, especially if you're a one-person show. I mean, what do you add to that, Chris?
What I add to that is that's level one. Don't use that as your everything, right? Because like I can tell when one of my team sends me an AI generated report off of name your AI generator, like, hey, don't freaking rely on AI. I need your input. And if you don't have input, then go do that. That's where you go do the research. So it gets you to level one, level two. It gets a start point, but we have to have that you have to be able to look and go, what's the gap analysis in this? What's missing, right? What else do I need? What do I need to go find? And I think that's the important piece out of it. It gets us to a better place very, very quickly, and helps us with formats, helps us with reporting, helps us collating, helps us with analysis, but you still have to do your work.
Well, I think, in the military, in the infantry or in the military, there's an axiom like the last 500 meters is the same for everybody. And what that really essentially means for those not in the military is like the last bit for everyone is the same. It's the suck, and it's the work, and it's the effort. Everybody has to do it, whether you're flying a helicopter, God forbid you're in a tank, or you're in the beloved infantry. That last bit of we're going to move and close with the enemy is the hard stuff. And I think of that here too. Like AI generates getting to that last 500 meters more quickly, but that last 500 meters is still you. I need to check my work. I need to put my Mark 1 eyeball on it. I need to put my Mark 4 brain and add to this. I worry sometimes a little bit that people lean in to just like, hey, I asked the free version of ChatGPT, or I asked the free version of Perplexity, or whatever you want to use here, this, and then I spit it out and I just cut and pasted it because I want Chris to think I'm cool.
Right. Or I'm smart, right? And I think that's great to get yourself to a better place, but that's your start point, not your end
Right.
point. And I think that's the piece that we miss, you know.
But I do think and this is maybe more for like leaders and management level discussions or people that have businesses, there is a greater aspect of artificial intelligence that is sucking in data and coming back and telling you trends, even if it's as much as like, hey, here's our spending goes up every year at this time because, we're coming into our most busiest season, or, there's insights that can be driven from that
Mhm.
that I think are, those are more like business level insights too.
Right. But if your business, again, I think we talked about this before, is that I'm a business person also, but my business is security, right?
Mhm.
So I can use those tools, which again are just like security tools, right? Or protective intelligence tool. They do one thing really well and they do the rest of it shit. So you gotta well, I only rely on freaking Microsoft's platform or Google's or whatever,
Yeah.
right? You gotta, each of them have their own skills and capabilities that they do really, really well. Why? Because they were developed by freaking people, right? So what do we look at and how do you find the right tool, and then how do you check and balance? And again, going back to that last 500, right? How do I apply that to my business? And I think
Yeah,
that becomes the important piece.
it will. I also think, going back to like the cyber analogy, I mean, it does allow all players to play in the same field. If you're using it in a decent way, and you're using it to help run your business and get insights, I mean, you might accelerate your business, whereas there might be other businesses that are slightly bigger that are like, I don't want anything to do with any of that, and they might find themselves suddenly having a little bit harder time, putting up the weight or running that last 500 meters
Right.
because
This is the way we've always
they're
done it.
not using it.
Right, right. So again, it's not the end all be all, right? But it is the opportunity for users to go like, hey, I have a full scope executive protection program. Here's what I have in it. How do I benchmark that against other protection
Yeah.
programs in the space, right? And there's probably not as much EP as I mean, as
Well,
you would think, right? In that language model. But then you can also have other GPTs or AIs, right, that help you support all of those in line. And I think that's the
yeah.
part that we need to get somebody else to come in and have a chat with us about. No pun intended.
Well, I mean, there's that idea, and Ontix has said this before. I've heard TK say it many times, like, collect the dots that connect them. And I think we're at a point here where collection and early stage connection is being accelerated by AI and things like that. But the last bit, like you said, the level 5, which is good, right? Level 5 is good, we decided. The
If you're a
level 5
cyber person, yes.
needs to be done by us. But one other thing I was thinking about too, like we were talking about ISO 9001 earlier. I mean, that's something you could throw into a GPT and say, hey, look, my business does this, or hey, I'm looking at this from a business person's point of view that runs a small executive protection firm. I'm looking for ways that I can compare what I do with an ISO 9001. Can you help me understand can you help me understand its themes, and then how I might look at them for a small business? Now, it's not going to give you 100% of the answer, but it's going to get you far enough, I think, to where now you can sit down with a cup of coffee, see what I did there, and
Yep.
say, how can I apply this to my business?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, again, that's what the tool is used for, is to give you a
Yeah.
broader picture and give you and figure out where your blind spots are. And then you can look at that tool and go, okay, here's where I connect the dots for those other blind spots. Or here's one of the things that they didn't come up with. And again,
Yep.
all of this is built on that foundation of martial skills and hard skills.
Yep.
If they're any different, right? That the protector is required to have, right?
Yep.
None of this takes away from any of that, right? It just enhances it, which it should. enhance.
I love it. I love it.
Good things, my
other
friend.
thoughts?
Good things.
I mean, other thoughts around the discussion with Kevin? I mean, there's more to unpack there, but I thought it was great. And I look forward to more that he has as he's talking about building his community, a series of books, all the stuff that he's doing.
Yeah, I do as well. I think look, the big thing is that ROI is consistently misunderstood in the security space, primarily because it's difficult to freaking categorize. But
Yes.
Kevin's formula has it is there, right? So seek it out and figure out what that looks like, because to me, this is the biggest tool for the security industry since freaking commercial EPs, really.
No, I agree.
It's there, right? So, and I'll give an example. Like in physical security, most ROI is based around cost of implementation of access control and CCTV versus do I need to put a body in place, right? That's freaking, what, 30, 40 years old now? And so we're trying to use that model as it applies to everything else that we bring in. And it doesn't make any freaking sense. Because at the end of the day, and this is our messaging here, is that whether you bring up protective intelligence platforms, surveillance, or situation awareness platforms, chats, blah, 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 you'll still need that team of people to manage those to any level of effectiveness beyond that, right?
Yep.
So the access control, CTV, that now you have the GSOC, right? And then I still have to deploy somebody to solve problems, right? It's no different. Technology alone will not solve your problem. You still have to have the person that, like, as you would say, that walks that last 500 meters to make it effective for the organization, whatever your organization is. So
I love it.
Kevin did great things with this, and I can't wait to see more.
Well, and absolutely. And as more develops, we'll get him back on. So I appreciated that. I appreciated your conversation with him, my friend. Well done. This has been Conversations in Close Protection. My name is Chuck Randolph. Across the digital divide has been the epistemological. Jesus.
How can you
Look,
I noticed halfway through the interview that you freaking you put my freaking name on there.
I know.
As trained observer.
Wash your hands, align your risk discussions, and watch your back.
Yeah, watch your six. And also go check out Kevin's. He's doing good things for the industry. Good times.
You've been listening to an episode of Conversations in Close Protection. Email us at protectiontalk@outlook.com and find us on your preferred podcast platform. Please take a moment and consider rating us to help others find Conversations in Close Protection too. Look for us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and other social media spots. Conversations in Close Protection is brought to you by your hosts Chuck Randolph and Chris Story. Our engineering editor is the mighty Aaron Peck. Please remember that all opinions expressed do not represent those of any organizations or companies the hosts are affiliated with. This is Rachel saying watch your six and keep your heads down.